In May of 2022, during our 2-month stay in Croatia, we booked a tour to the city of Dubrovnik. The van departed from Split, following a route of about 138 miles, 230 kilometers, on a road system that was world-class all the way. In Croatia, they drive on the right-hand side of the road, a familiar custom to those of us from the US. For the first hour or so on the drive, we headed inland, where we saw some village gardens and some beautiful farming areas. The major agricultural crops in Croatia include corn, wheat, rye, sunflowers, and olives, of which they are especially proud. As we continue the drive heading back to the coast, the landscapes are lush and green, and particularly stunning. Along our route, we see some expansive vineyards as we get closer to the coast again. Regions of Croatia have been producing wine for thousands of years now. The Mediterranean climate of Dalmatia is ideal for growing grapes, with its hot and humid summers, combined with mild winters. Surprisingly, the trip involves a brief crossing through Bosnia and Herzegovina. We were required to produce IDs, which meant we got to notch another country in our passports. The Croatian government has contracted with a major Chinese construction consortium to engineer a bypass route for travelers to avoid this barrier. The bypass leaves the Croatian mainland a few miles before the Bosnia and Herzegovina border and crosses the new bridge onto the Croatian Pelisats Peninsula. The road then travels the length of the peninsula and heads back onto the Croatian mainland at a point beyond the Bosnia and Herzegovina border. The project is expected to be completed by July 2022. The van took a break in a little Bosnian seaside town called Neum, with views straight out of a tourist catalog. We stop at one of the local hotels with an amazing view of the surrounding area. As we again enter Croatia, we see a number of farming operations cultivating oysters and shellfish just offshore. Our guide informs us that this place is called Stone. He says that if you order oysters at a restaurant anywhere in this area, even in Split, this is where the high-quality oysters are harvested. After further travel down the beautiful coastline, we round the corner, and are amazed by the expanse of brilliantly colored blue water before us. The city of Dubrovnik presents itself in dramatic fashion, with a view of the impressive cruise port in Gruž. The port has tremendous capacity, and can accommodate up to 5 cruise ships at a time. These ships are the lifeblood of Dubrovnik tourism, bringing thousands of visitors to the city each year. We stop briefly at the lookout point to admire the scene of a few of the mega ships, and the modern Franjo Tuđman Bridge. We have now nearly arrived, and are crossing the bridge to our destination. We are heading for the old town of Dubrovnik. But first we pass through the modern part of the city. We arrive at the walls of Old Town Dubrovnik, and get our first glimpse of one of the most impressive World Heritage sites. As we start our adventure, we see the northern land side of the wall, which was first constructed in the 13th century, and reach heights of 83 feet, 25 meters. An impressive engineering feat for that time in history. The 1.6 miles, 2 kilometers of wall, connected a series of fortified towers, and 5 fortresses, all to protect the city from invaders. Once we breach those formidable walls, we are prepared to immerse ourselves in this historic city and all its beauty.
Hello from Dubrovnik, Croatia, the Pearl of the Adriatic. And it's called the Pearl of the Adriatic for good reason. Look at these beautiful, crystal clear waters. Such a beautiful natural setting. And behind me, the history is amazing. These are the original walls of the Dubrovnik Old Town. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Dubrovnik today, the area, especially the early history, and then we'll talk a little bit about the fictional history, and you all know what I'm talking about there. I won't say the name yet. But Dubrovnik is one of the most visited cities in the eastern Mediterranean Adriatic area. It's the most visited in Croatia, and for good reason. A lot of that has to do with the fictional history, as we said, but along the way people discover the real history, and that's more important, of course. We came down from Split today on an excursion. It's about 230 kilometers, 4 hours drive, but the drive itself is well worth it, so it's well worth that investment. A little bit about the early history. The original settlements here were pre-Greek civilization, and then obviously the Greek empires, Byzantines, the Romans. The Romans had the most serious settlement here, and hence the name Dubrovnik actually comes from that period. And slowly but surely the old town was built up, fortifications were put up, but it wasn't until the 13th century that they started putting up these very serious walls, and that went on for several hundred years, and the city was not level, but came close to being leveled by a big earthquake in the 1600s. But it's been rebuilt. It's magnificent. The colors, attention to detail, and about 1,000 people still live in the city, which is amazing. Definitely a bucket list item. After the Romans lost their power here, a series of Italian kingdoms took over, but most importantly the Venetians. Later on, Napoleon even had a period where he controlled the area. The Austro-Hungarians controlled right through the beginning to end of the First World War, and the rest obviously is modern history. The fictional history goes back to Game of Thrones, and if you're a big fan, this is one of the big settings here. We've got Blackwater Bay right here, which is obviously well known to fans. You've got the Walk of Shame in the city, and you've got all kinds of locations and spots where filming took place in the city, and you can see why the setting is just perfect for that. And as you know, this is part of Westeros and King's Landing. It's just rich in real and fictional history. So when it comes to bucket list items, Dubrovnik, come and see it for yourself.
We are introduced to our guide for the 90-minute walking tour, who provides us with a detailed history of Old Town. We then head toward the Place Gate entrance on the eastern side of the fortress walls, with a view of the old port. The St. John Fort, one of 5 major fortress battlements that protect Old Town, guards the entrance on the far side of the port. After we cross the stone bridge, our attention is drawn to Fort Reveling. This fort is one of the few ancient structures that survived the 1667 earthquake that devastated much of the city. Next, we pass 10th century St. Luke's Church. The details on the buildings here are exquisite, especially considering their age, and how beautifully they have been restored and preserved. St. Sebastian's is a small medieval church, built in 1466 to protect residents from the plague. The St. Saviour Church was originally commissioned by the local Senate after a devastating 1520 earthquake. The church was meant to celebrate the fact that most of the city was spared. St. Saviour also survived the massive earthquake of 1667 and is one of the oldest buildings in the city today. We venture inside to see its interior, and are humbled by the detail of the architecture and the ornate religious symbolism. Time to head toward the Old Town Piers and Old Town Harbor. At the height of its maritime power, Dubrovnik had almost 700 boats and ships under its protection, including shoreline fishing boats, and nearly 250 seagoing vessels. As we make our way to the edge of the water, we again see the impressive St. John Fort guarding the southeastern flank of the Old Town. The Maritime Museum sits next to the fort. A series of vaulted arches identify the old arsenal building, where Old Town shipbuilders applied their craft in secret. Today, vendors line the piers, selling island excursions. We make our way to Stradun, the main street in Dubrovnik's Old Town. Built at the end of the 9th century, it is paved with polished stone blocks. Stradun was originally a canal that separated the two rock settlements on which the city was founded in the early Middle Ages. When the canal was later filled in, Stradun became a street. Stradun ends with Luza Square, surrounded by historic buildings that have stood for centuries. The square is the hub around which life in Dubrovnik has revolved for hundreds of years. It has been, and still is today, a place for locals, as well as visitors, to gather. Within Luza Square is the Church of St. Blaise, the patron saint of Dubrovnik. It is one of the city's major sites. Constructed in 1715, the building architecture displays numerous statuary and ornate details, all along its facade. The 16th century architecture of Sponza Palace, whose name derives in Latin to the spot where rainwater was collected, survived the city's 1667 earthquake without damage. The palace is now home to the city archives, which holds documents dating back to the 12th century. The Rector's Palace was the administrative center of the Dubrovnik Republic of Ragusa, starting in the 14th century. It also held an armory, the powder magazine, the watch house, and a prison. Today it houses the Cultural Historic Department of the Dubrovnik Museum. The Rector's Palace atrium has excellent acoustics, and is often used as a concert venue. As we continue to explore, we wander along the steep and narrow side streets, and discover everyday life in Dubrovnik. More than 1,000 people still live in Old Town, and the quaint beauty of the residences we encounter, nestled among the historic architecture, feels like being part of a movie set. We happen upon Croatian culture, in art, and music. Which brings us to the famed Big Onofrio's fountain. Water was originally brought to the city via Roman aqueduct, and this fountain was the last stop for all that water. Places to eat abound, from grab-and-go options, like pizza, or a unique and eclectic eatery, off the beaten path, to a more traditional restaurant, with open-air seating, creating a relaxing ambiance. All of this is just a few steps away from an amazing view of Dubrovnik Old Town, the Adriatic Sea, and an iconic location from the epic Game of Thrones HBO series. Game of Thrones has drawn thousands of tourists to Dubrovnik. Filming in Old Town at multiple locations has made the city a global star. From over-the-top colossal-size buildings, to period doors, and enormous walls, it's easy to see why Old Town was the perfect choice for the series. In Dubrovnik history, Fort Bokar protected Old Town against sea attacks coming from their southeast access points, and rests on the shore of Pile Harbor. This location in Game of Thrones was cast as King's Landing Harbor, where most arrivals and departures were shot. This picturesque body of water was used for the epic Battle of Blackwater Bay, and the pier that extends out toward the rocks was also used in several scenes throughout the series. High up on the ridge lies the formidable structure of Fort Lovre-Onitz, which protected Old Town against sea attacks coming from their southwest access points. This fortification is the fictional home of the Red Keep. The Minseta Tower was pivotal in guarding Old Town against landside invaders to the northeast. In Game of Thrones, its base was featured as the House of the Undying. Pile Gate was the filming location of the riot, a scene with Joffrey confronting an angry mob as he heads back to the Red Keep. The ornate Baroque Jesuit staircase towers up toward one of the highest points on the southern end of Old Town. Cersei's famous Walk of Shame took place on this staircase. We couldn't resist taking a few shots of our own in this real-life historic city-turned-film location. Of course, our friend Rennie was not going to be left out. An option for elevated views of Old Town is the Dubrovnik cable car that climbs 4 minutes to the top of Serge Hill. At the end of the tour, our van driver treated us to a view at an alternate lookout point above Sveti Jakov Beach. From this amazing vantage point just south of the city, and high above Dubrovnik, we had impressive views of Old Town and the island of Lokrum. Lokrum also featured prominently in Game of Thrones as the city of Karth. Some of the garden scenes were filmed in the beautiful botanical gardens of Lokrum, and the famed Iron Throne is now housed in Lokrum Island's Visitors Center. The beautiful backdrop made for a fitting ending to our visit to the historic city of Dubrovnik, in Croatia.